Story 1. This isn't a story about a ghost or some killer in a rubber mask. This is about the sound of autumn, and what happens when that sound stops being a seasonal comfort and starts sounding like a deliberate, damp lie. It was the first week after the clocks fell back. The kind of late October where the sun dies at 5:15 p.m., and the cold isn't crisp yet. It's just wet and heavy, soaking the sound out of everything. I live on a street where the houses are set back from the pavement by deep, messy yards. Every single oak and maple on my street decides to dump its entire life load precisely during that week, resulting in a 3-foot-thick carpet of damp, rust-colored debris. It's picturesque until you realize that carpet muffles everything. I was in my kitchen, around 11:30 p.m., making tea. The house was quiet. Too quiet. That vacuum-sealed silence that only arrives with the heavy autumn fog and the deep drop in temperature. I had the window cracked for ventilation, and that's when I heard it. It wasn't a crunch. That's the default sound assumption when you think of walking on leaves. This was a trawl. It sounded like someone was dragging a heavy, wet sack across the ground, a low, continuous scrape that ended with a soft, dull thump. It was too slow for an animal, too steady for the wind, and it was coming from the edge of my property, near the street curb. I froze, listening intently. SCHCHHDRRAG. Pause. Thump. I told myself it was just a branch the wind finally decided to move. But the wind wasn't moving the trees. They were standing still, dripping condensation. Fear, the realistic kind, doesn't make you scream or run. It makes you hyper-focus on details. I crept into the dining room, which faced the street. I didn't turn on any lights. I pressed my face close to the cold glass, using the faint orange wash of the distant street lamp as my only guide. The leaves were so high they covered the bottom step of my porch. The street looked like the surface of a murky red lake. I couldn't see anything, but the sound was closer now. It was definitely in my yard. Shh, drag. Thump. It was moving laterally, parallel to the house, but slowly closing the distance to the porch. Whatever was causing the noise was completely submerged by the leaf canopy. And that was the terrifying part. You could hear the friction, the bulk, but you couldn't see the source. It was pure acoustic dread. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I could feel the cold radiating from the glass and soaking into my clothes. I had to know. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it out the window, keeping the beam tight and low. For a moment, the beam bounced off the wet leaves, making them glow a sickly yellow-orange. Nothing. Then the sound stopped. Dead quiet. I held my breath, the light shaking slightly. I swept the beam farther left, toward the giant oak tree near my driveway. That's when I saw the movement. It wasn't movement on the leaves. It was movement under them. The surface of the leaf bed, maybe 5 feet from the window, was undulating, like something massive and low was shoving itself forward just beneath the mulch. It wasn't digging. It was waiting, using the thick autumn layer as natural, sound-dampening camouflage. The horrifying implication hit me instantly. Whatever this was, it knew the leaves made it invisible and silent. My focus was absolute, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the sight. The bulge in the leaves stopped just beneath the window ledge. I saw a patch of black, not soil, but something like wet synthetic fabric, emerge from the leaves, followed by a hand. It was a gloved hand, caked in mud and pulverized leaf matter, pulling the rest of the body forward. The motion was slow, methodical, and completely prone. Then, the head cleared the leaves. It was a man. Or at least, the shape of one, dressed in dark, heavy clothing coated with the dark mulch of the forest floor. He was facing the house, his eyes barely visible in the dark shadow cast by the phone light. They were wide open, looking directly at my face pressed against the glass. He didn't move any further or make any noise. He just lay there, halfway submerged in the dead leaves, his body perfectly camouflaged against the dark wood of the porch railing. We were separated by less than 5 feet of cold glass. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by my own ragged breathing, I held the light on him for maybe 10 seconds, an eternity wrapped in cold dread. And then, without lifting his head or shifting his gaze from mine, he began to move backward. The glove retreated. The black fabric slipped back under the rusty surface. Shh, drag. Thump. The sound, which had been so close and terrifying, began to recede back toward the street. The leaves undulated one final time, then settled back into place, looking completely undisturbed. It was as if the ground had just swallowed him whole. I locked every door and window in the house and sat up until dawn, watching the front yard. By 6:30 a.m., the first light revealed nothing but the thick, beautiful, undisturbed carpet of fallen autumn leaves. I never heard the sound again. But now, every year when the leaves start piling up, I hear that silence. And I know that something, or someone, out there understands exactly how to use the quiet, cold darkness of the season to erase the line between the world outside and the terror waiting just beneath the surface. I realize now that he wasn't trying to break in. He was just passing through, using my yard, and I caught him doing what he does every autumn. And he knows I know. Story 2. The crisp, clean air of late October was supposed to be a balm. I'd rented an old cabin deep in the Vermont woods, not far from the Canadian border, hoping the isolation and the vibrant explosion of autumn color would clear my head after a particularly rough year. The drive-in had been spectacular. Sugar maples blazing crimson, aspens shimmering gold against a brilliant blue sky. It was exactly what I'd pictured. Peace. The cabin itself was rustic, perched on a slight rise, surrounded by a dense wall of deciduous trees. The first few days were idyllic. I'd wake to mist clinging to the valley below, drink my coffee on the small porch, listening to the ceaseless whisper of leaves falling, a gentle rain of russet, ochre, and brown. Evenings were spent by the crackling fire, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. But as the days shortened and the wind picked up, a subtle shift began. The beauty started to feel less inviting, more possessive. The woods became a dense, watchful presence. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the usual damp earth and decaying leaves, but something else. Sweeter, almost cloying, like overripe fruit left too long, mixed with a deep, loamy dampness I couldn't quite place. It wasn't unpleasant initially, just persistent. I chalked it up to the forest floor turning over. Then came the leaves. They were everywhere, of course, but around the cabin, they seemed to gather with an unusual intent. Piles against the foundation, banking up against the windowsills, almost as if they were being pushed there, like a silent, slow siege. I'd sweep them away from the porch and walkways in the morning, only to find new, denser drifts by afternoon. It felt less like wind and more like something else, deliberate. I told myself it was just the way the cabin caught the drafts. At night, the sounds began. Not the hoot of an owl or the skittering of squirrels. There was a low, resonant rustling, distinct from the wind. It sounded like something large, heavy, dragging itself through the undergrowth, just beyond the perimeter of the faint cabin lights. When I'd shine my flashlight into the darkness, the sound would invariably cease, leaving only the endless, dry rattle of unseen branches. The beam would cut through the bare trunks, revealing nothing but deeper shadows. One morning, as I stepped onto the porch, I saw it. Resting on the weathered wood, directly in front of the door, was a small, crudely carved wooden figure. It was no bigger than my palm, shaped like a stylized person, with two blank, deep-set holes for eyes. The wood was dark, almost black, and felt strangely smooth, despite its rough carving. I knew for a fact it hadn't been there the night before. I hadn't carved it. No one else was supposed to be around for miles. My heart gave a little lurch. A prank? But who? And why? I picked it up, feeling an inexplicable chill, and tossed it into the woods. The gesture felt defiant, but it didn't stop. The piles of leaves grew higher. Now they were almost to the top of the lower windows, a solid rustling wall. And the smell, that sweet, earthy, fungal aroma, was stronger, sickly now, seeping into the cabin itself. I started to feel watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a flicker of movement. Every creak of the old house made me jump. One afternoon, peering through a small gap in the leaf-choked window, I thought I saw something tall, impossibly thin, dart between two maples far off in the tree line. It moved too fast, too fluidly, to be human, or animal. Panic was a cold knot in my stomach. I knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that I had to leave. I started throwing my things into my bag, my movements jerky and rushed. The cabin, which had felt like refuge, now felt like a trap. As I zipped my duffel, a new sound cut through the oppressive silence. A soft, scraping, rhythmic thump from directly above me. Inside the cabin. It wasn't mice. It was too heavy, too deliberate. My eyes snapped to the ceiling. There, in the corner of the living room, was the small, square hatch to the attic. It was slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered closing it tightly when I'd first arrived. A sickening wave of dread washed over me, stronger than anything I'd felt before. The sweet fungal smell was suddenly overwhelming, concentrated, pouring down from the gap. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, carefully, I pushed a chair over, climbed onto it, and with a trembling hand, reached up to ease the hatch open further. Darkness. And then, as my eyes adjusted, not darkness, but a different kind of camouflage. There, stretched across the old wooden beams, was a vast, mottled expanse. It was dark brown and greenish-black, like wet, decaying bark, but it wasn't wood. It was textured, uneven, almost like matted fur or something organic. It spread across the entire attic, blending seamlessly with the old timbers, making it impossible to tell where the structure ended and it began. It pulsed, almost imperceptibly, a slow, deep ripple. And what I'd thought were dead leaves, piled and scattered up there, weren't leaves at all. They were extensions, like brittle, chitinous plates, part of the thing itself, layered and interwoven, reaching down, almost touching the hatch. I saw no face, no limbs, nothing definitive, only this vast, breathing, decaying forest entity, interwoven with the very fabric of the old cabin. And the smell, it was coming from that. The sweet, cloying aroma of decay and life. I slammed the hatch shut with a force that rattled the whole cabin, scrambling off the chair. My body was screaming, every instinct roaring to flee. I snatched my bag and keys, threw open the front door, and ran. I didn't look back until I was in my car, engine roaring to life, tires spitting gravel down the winding track. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Through the rapidly thinning forest, past the skeletal branches of the maples, I could still see the cabin. It looked different now, almost swallowed by the encroaching shadows of dusk. And on its small, weathered porch, neatly arranged in a chilling tableau, were at least a dozen of those crude, blank-eyed wooden figures. They sat there, facing the woods, or perhaps, facing the retreating taillights of my car, like silent, ancient witnesses to a terrible harvest. The cabin, the trees, the ground itself. It all felt like a single, waiting, hungry organism, slowly reclaiming what it considered its own.